Well, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to the AP session. We're excited to be with you today. Roxanne and I will be with you this afternoon to engage in a conversation around um, discretionary moves, curricular materials, instructional practices, and then also a sharing of resources. So we're excited to be with you today and do that work. I offer to you um, an opportunity to engage. So even though this is an asynchronous experience for you, we will pause throughout the process and then give you an opportunity to do some individual reflection before moving forward. Feel free to stop the video at any time for you to engage in any individual reflection that you need to. So with that, we will begin. So our objectives today, what we're going to accomplish first is grounded around getting a clear definition and understanding of how discretionary moves shows up as a racist or an anti-racist practice in a classroom. So we're gonna define that for ourselves. Then we're gonna spend some time, Roxanne's gonna walk us through an opportunity to hear her plan or an example of a plan, or example of a teacher or a PLC planning around curricular materials and what are the discretionary moves that show up in that. And then lastly, we'll engage and share with you some resources that would be helpful in applying this work moving forward. We'll start with an agenda. Our agenda, we'll start with a quick conversation around curriculum, teacher practices, and instructional power in that intersection. Then we'll go deeper. As I said, Roxanne will walk us through an example of how discretionary moves might show up in a lesson. And then lastly, orienting to our one-pager curricular resources. So with that, we will dive right in. So let's start by just level setting about what we mean when we say curriculum, teacher practices, and instructional power. And so if we think about curricular resources as what we've talked about in years past, right? Curricular resources meaning the written curriculum, what is written down, the teacher practices being the taught curriculum, right? So once we've taken this written curriculum, how do we then create activities, lessons, and experiences for students? Some folks call it the craft, some folks call it pedagogy, but it's the actions and the moves that teachers are making. And that in those actions and moves of the translation from the curricular resources or the written curriculum to the taught curriculum, the teacher practices, there's a lot of instructional power that shows up in that space. And many times you guys see that as evidence through the core actions. So you see how the teacher is engaging and you're using the core actions as evidence around that. So a lot of these things we already know. And today it's really about being more precise in what we see and also how we engage our teachers as a result of that. And in high school, I think it's even more important because high school does not have an adopted curriculum. So the level of discretion that teachers have to make these choices is actually quite significant. So our ability to be able to coach around that and also identify what's going on becomes significant as well. So before we move forward, so before we dig a little bit deeper into an example, let's just ground ourselves again in what we mean by instructional power. So we're gonna share with you a video, Dr. Reed Marshall. You saw this actually probably a year ago to the day, where she talks about what instructional power looks like. And so what we would ask is that you'll watch the video, and as you're watching, you're gonna think about two questions that you'll reflect around. The first one will be around, what does Dr. Reed Marshall mean when she says instructional power? What does she mean by that? And then the second question is, what are the immediate and long-term impacts of not examining? How we wield our instructional power and how we leverage our discretion while teaching. And I would even argue while planning as well. So I'm gonna stop sharing so that we can play the video and then we'll pause for reflection and then continue forward in our learning.
When you link your instructional power, and here's what happens. You link it to the curriculum that comes out and you push it through your pedagogy. Your power as an instructionally embodied leader shows up when you look at that curriculum guide and you say, I'm not doing that. When your leader in your building gives you something to do regarding pedagogy and you make a determination and you shut your door and you do what you want. That is your instructional power at work. Your instructional power shows up when you decide to scaffold assignments in ways that are directive versus generative. What do I mean? Directive means that you do it in such a way as to prescribe thought. That's directive. You scaffold so heavily that students don't have to do anything because if you love your kids, love them enough to let them struggle. Generative scaffolding is that scaffolding grounded in questioning. That you help students get through the struggle by a great question. You want a good answer from a kid? Ask them a great question. The answer is in the question. That's that difference between directive scaffolding and generative scaffolding. Your instructional power shows up when you are the 82% that said you believed every kid could learn, but you actually are in the 20 who said the kids in front of you aren't in that group. And you redirect and you choose a lower text for a 10th grader because he can't read anyway. Or you look at your kids and you say, you know what? These kids have no background knowledge and I got to give it to them. Kids come with background knowledge. Your instructional power shows up when you hear language that sounds outside of the American view of what language should sound like in schools, and therefore you disrupt and you correct. That is your instructional power. And you strip away a child's identity by forcing upon them linguistic constructs that they may not need in the moment. We have instructional power. We wield it every minute. In those 4 minutes, every last one of them, endow and show your power at work. And that's important to understand.
All right, so given that conversation, we wanted to pause and give you an opportunity to reflect. So if you would, take an opportunity to pause the video and do a reflection for maybe 5 minutes. And then once you're finished reflecting, unpause the video and we will continue. All right, welcome back. So this discussion around instructional power is grounded around several different factors. So there are some significant factors that influence a teacher's discretionary moves, right? So race, gender, bias, previous experiences, all of those impact the way that a teacher might make discretionary moves. And in addition to their knowledge around the content and their knowledge around the curriculum, right? So content meaning standards, curriculum meaning how those standards are laid out, what are the resources that are being used as well. The knowledge of the students, what they know about the students or what they think they know about the students, in addition to the expectations or perceived expectations that they have from their administration. So all of those things can influence a teacher's discretionary moves as they go through the planning and execution process. More importantly, it is important for us to note that discretion, sometimes folks will think of it as a negative thing, but it actually could be quite a positive thing. And that discretionary moves can have a positive or negative impact on student learning, in addition to the classroom environment and how kids show up in their most fullest selves in those spaces. And so teachers are more likely to make positive discretionary moves first when they've had an opportunity to reflect on their instruction in addition to their own bias, right? So even simple questions like, what were the assumptions you were thinking about? What were the assumptions you made as you were planning this lesson? As a simple example or a simple question to ask a teacher in an effort to uncover what are some of the biases that they might have, good or bad, about their students. Secondly, teachers are more likely to make positive discretionary moves if they are planning for the content, one, but also planning for the discretionary spaces. Sometimes we only unpack content, but we actually don't talk about how that then shows up in the craft. And so with that in mind, we're going to engage in our next activity. And in our next activity, Roxanne is going to model for us a planning experience. So it could be a teacher or a PLC, and they're going through a planning process. So Roxanne's going to do that. While Roxanne is engaging with us and doing this think aloud, I want you to think about two questions, and we'll pause and give you an opportunity to reflect at the end of her think aloud. The first question is, what are the discretionary moves that Roxanne is making? So as you're listening to her, what are the discretionary moves that she's making? And then the second question is, what are the implications, or what's the impact on your practice, right? What are the implications for your practice as a result of listening to this activity? What does it make you want to go do? All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Roxanne may start sharing her screen and take us through this process.
Brandy, you have to share screen with me. Perfect.
Thanks, Roxanne.
Hello, everyone. So this afternoon, I'd like to walk you through what instructional planning might look like using district-provided curriculum resources. I'll be using the English 2 course curriculum for this demonstration. So as a teacher, I have access to planning documents in the teacher resource module of my courses. That's where I'm going to start today. So first, I'm going to open the English 2 scope and sequence document so that I can see the focus standards, the number of lessons that have been provided, and the recommended pacing of that unit of study. For example, in Unit 2, I know there are 6 lessons provided and that the recommended pacing is 14 days. I know that that's one of my first discretionary moves, is to figure out, is that enough time or is that too much time based on my students' needs? Once I know the skills that my students will need to know and apply, I'm going to open the Unit 2 planning guide. This document outlines all the texts, the videos, the lesson components that are provided in the unit of study. This is where I begin to consider my instructional choices. So looking at the text provided, I wonder if there are other texts I might want to include to bring in another point of view. And should I consider teaching the whole text or just excerpts? What essential questions am I going to use to focus student thinking? What's the balance of the reading, the writing, and the opportunities for speaking and listening in this unit? This unit overview grounds me in the essential learning, but it also causes me to think through implementation of the lessons. I know I need to dig deeper into the curriculum. As I go further into the planning guide, I begin to see the lessons take shape. Now I can consider content and craft. I like to think of content as the what and craft as the how of the lessons. These two distinct spaces, content and craft, are where I make many discretionary moves. In my PLC, we talk about being intentional in the moves as we consider the many factors that both inhibit and promote equitable learning experiences. Considering content, I'm thinking about which vocabulary from the text I will need to teach explicitly to make sure that all of my students can access meaning. I'm also considering how I might use the text to model examples of good writing. In considering craft, I think about the strategies I'm modeling for my students or tools that I might provide to engage them in the learning. How will I design questions to push my students to provide evidence in their answers, or even to provoke deep thinking? How am I deciding who to place in the groups? How am I being mindful of ensuring all of my students' voices are heard and respected? What's the highest level leverage strategy to address the skill? Am I considering equity issues in this lesson? During this part of my planning, I also need to think about who I'm planning the lesson for. Have I considered the needs of all of my students? What about my L students who are struggling with the language? What about my EC students who might need some more support? What's the best way to address specific learners' needs? Now that I have a deeper understanding of the unit of study and the intentional moves I'm considering, I need to consider how to best maximize my instructional time. When planning for synchronous learning time, I want to leverage my opportunities for modeling skills and thinking, for teaching and discussing with students. I want to use our time together to build skills and to make thinking visible for them so that they can use those skills in asynchronous time. Considering how to best use this time means I'm thinking about what the challenges are that my students might face with the text or with a skill, and intentionally teaching skills and strategies so that they can transfer them to use on their own. I'm building agency and autonomy. What do I need to model or teach explicitly so that students have agency to practice or apply what they've learned? Where can I build in collaboration and discussion? What tools can make learning more effective and engaging? How should I sequence the lesson to maximize student engagement? And how will I ask them to demonstrate understanding?
Thank you, Roxanne. So Roxanne's Think Aloud was an opportunity for us to take our definition that we've been tooling with and working with, and then apply it to an example. And so at this point, we're going to ask you to pause and reflect. What were some discretionary moves you heard Roxanne make in her discussion and in her Think Aloud? And then two, what are the implications for your practice as a result of that? So we'll ask you to pause the video and take a moment to do that reflection. And then when you come back, we'll share a little bit more around resources and close out the session. Welcome back. So as we move forward and think about our next steps, but also kind of stamp this learning that we've had today, if we keep in mind that this conversation around discretionary moves, as I said before, is critical to the work of high school. We do not have a high school curriculum. So the way that teachers go about building out this content is going to be critical. And our ability to be able to support and coach them will also be critical. So many times when asked, like, how do I even begin to apply this or to actualize or operationalize this? Most of the time, the question is centered around where are resources that I can use? And so over the course of the last couple of months, we have given out a lot of resources. And the request has been around, is there a one-stop shop we can go to get these resources? And so we wanted to share with you that there is. Many of you have already seen this, but we wanted to make sure that all of you were aware of it. So there is a Principal One page or resource guide for principals that encompasses several departments. However, one area we wanted to pull up today was around learning and teaching. So this deck is hyperlinked. You can click on the links and it will take you to all these different pages. But if you started with the Central Office Departmental Resource Guide for Principals and clicked on Learning and Teaching, there's a button there. It'll take you to a Learning and Teaching Go-To Resources document. And this is a comprehensive list ranging from advanced studies to pre-K to remote learning instructional resources, et cetera, et cetera. But from there, in that document, you'll see something that says Curriculum and Professional Development. When you click on that, it will take you directly to a a resource page that has a playbook for K-12 curricular resources. So some of the things that you heard Roxanne engage with, or the resources that she engaged with, you can find on the Canvas courses under the Teacher Resources module in the Canvas course that you've been accessing, your teacher's Canvas courses you've been accessing. However, you can also find many of those resources here as well. So we wanted to start by just sharing with you that this resource is available as a one-stop shop. So when in doubt and you're wondering, like, where do I begin to find this? This is a good place to begin to find these resources. Secondly, I wanted to pull out two additional resources. Many of you are already engaging in Canvas courses and looking at the tasks that students are being asked to complete and monitoring instruction through your Canvas admin access. There may be a few of you who still do not have that. We wanted to offer up a resource for that. It's a screencast that walks you through how to access your Canvas admin portal Canvas admin link to get access to Canvas. And additionally, if there's someone on your team who does not have access and you maybe don't have the time, or you just want to send them the quick resource, this is available for you to do so. The second thing is, when thinking about discretionary moves, is really grounded around, like, so what did it look like before the changes, right? So the original versions of many of the courses are available using this particular resource. So we offered this up to you as well, in case you're wondering, like, how did it look before the teacher applied their discretion? So we offer that up as well as an opportunity. Many of you also already know that our instructional leads have been engaging in professional development over the course of the year. Today, the day that we are recording this video, instructional leads are participating in part 2 of their learning, grounded around differentiated core and how we differentiate to support learners. And when you think about differentiation, it is steeped in discretion in terms of what's the data we're using, what are the assumptions we're making, and what are my experiences. So we wanted to offer that up. It's asynchronous for high school, so you can do it at any time. It launched today, October 29th. And it's available to you between now, October 29th, and the next instructional lead instructional lead meeting, which I believe is November 20th, so November 19th or 20th, it'll be available. With that concludes our conversation today. 2 things I do want to just alert you to in this video, that we did save the chat feature for both trainings. So if you're interested in wanting to hear what your colleagues wrote in terms of responses to some of the reflections, that's available to you. We thank you for your time and your energy and all the hard work you put in daily to support your students and your staff. And if at any point in time you need us, please feel free to reach out. Roxanne and I are here to support you. Thank you so much. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.